You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to The Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway, and as always on a Sunday evening, I like to bring you something a little different into the studio. Joining me tonight, I have the lovely Ashley Knibb. Good evening, Ashley. How are you?
Evening, Kerry. I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. And we also have a very special guest in the studio tonight. Amazing gentleman. We have Dr Terence Palmer in the studio tonight. Good evening. Terry, good evening.
Hello, Kerry, and hello, Ashley.
Hi, Terry.
Good to be here.
Fantastic. Dr Terence Palmer is interested in evidence-based hypnotherapy to test the efficiency of spirit release treatment, or therapy, as a treatment for modality for hearing voices and other treatment-resistant conditions. He's also an author, has written the book The Tao of Natural Cycles and the Science of Spirit Possession. He is also an appointed Director of Research for the American Society for Standards in Mediumship and Paranormal Investigations. We are thrilled you can join us in the studio tonight. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, Kerry.
So my interest in talking to you is your levels of research at this moment in time. Can you tell us a little bit about the spirit release therapy, please?
Yes, there are lots of different ways this can be researched for evidence, for its efficacy, the way it works. The simplest method that I use is for every case that is brought to my attention, every case of a person that comes to me for help, I will record the intervention. And when the intervention's finished, I'll say to the client, did that work? Are you feeling better, yes or no? So you've got your baseline data to begin with, pre-intervention. What is the person suffering from? Let's say, for example, they're, putting it simply, hearing voices, okay, and diagnosed with schizophrenia or auditory hallucinations. And they come to me and I introduce the intervention, get rid of the cause of the voices, and then afterwards I'll say, are you still hearing voices, yes or no? So every case that is treated in that way is evidence in a database of cases. So we have a collection of case studies. That's one way. The simplest way of doing the research. Of course, what's required then is for someone else to come along, to analyse that data. And this is psychological research. It's known as qualitative research rather than quantitative. We're not counting statistical information. This is analysing the dialogue and to gain from it the quality and the effectiveness of the dialogue. It's known as qualitative research. And this kind of research is ideal for students who want to get a master's degree or a PhD in psychology, quality of research methods. So that's the easiest way to do it. And there are others, but I'll allow you to, because I can talk all night, so you're going to have to stop me.
So what you're actually looking at is whether an earthbound spirit is attached to a person rather than it being a physical or a mental issue.
That's a very difficult question to answer, because if you were to ask me a question about spirits, the answer is always yes. It depends on the question. You just mentioned earthbound spirits. That's one kind of spirit. You've also got non-human spirits, dark force entities. In religious language, they could be called devils or demons. And then you've got alien species, you've got interdimensional species, intergalactic species. It's a whole range. If you can take in the physical world, okay, in the physical world on Earth, we have different species of plants, animals, insects, fish, birds, and so on. Okay, and it's vast, isn't it? Absolutely vast. And zoologists and biologists are working on discovering new species all the time. Right? Well, in the spiritual dimension, it's the same. Okay, so whenever I'm working on a case, I will investigate to see what kind of spirit we're dealing with. What's the species? What's its origin? What's its intention? Why is it here? And again, this provides an amazing database of information.
So, okay, so what kind of, I'm going to call them entities as a broad term. What kind of entities have you actually encountered throughout your research and work so far?
Right. Earthbound spirits, those are the spirits of people who've died and haven't moved on. Those are the simplest ones to deal with. Aliens from other galaxies and other dimensions that have an interest in human beings. They were investigating us as scientists because they're curious about us in much the same way that we are curious about new species. And you have good spirits and you have bad spirits. You've got beings of light from other dimensions that when people hear their voices and hear their communications, they are often attributed as being the voice of God, for example. So we have to now ask the question, what is God? What is this voice? Who is it that's speaking to us? And you don't really know until you start asking. The range is vast. So, yeah, interdimensional parasitic creatures that feed off human energy. And they're just like bugs, like any kind of parasite, any kind of bacteria. And you have another kind of entity. The ones that I find most interesting to engage in dialogue are the interdimensional creatures that use human beings as a host for the propagation of their offspring. Now, in order to understand this, you first have to appreciate that we have a physical body, okay? We also have an etheric body, which is, if you like, a spirit body, what the spiritists call a perispirit, and different cultures give it different names. But when we die, when our physical body dies and the spirit leaves the physical body, it still has a form of body. It's an etheric body, okay? And these interdimensional creatures use the etheric body as an incubator for their offspring.
Interesting.
Right.
Isn't it?
That's fascinating, because I've come across these terms working spiritually, obviously, but I've never actually encountered anybody that has done work and actually had dialogue with these kind of entities. So I find this completely fascinating to me. So when you get a case file come into you, you obviously do your pre-work interviews, I would imagine, to sort of see where you're going with this. How do you cross that dimension yourself? Do you work on a mediumistic level, or do you bring in mediums in? How do you do that? I
have to work with a medium because I'm not a medium myself. Okay. I don't see or hear spirit at all. So spiritually speaking, I'm completely blind and deaf, like most people, like most scientists. Okay. So I have to work with a medium. I get a case come in and I call up my colleague, my working partner, medium, and say, right, we've got a case here. Can you link in with this person's energetic, etheric body and tell me what you find? And we go through a protocol. It's a checklist where I ask these questions, and he will change the frequency of his observation. It's a bit like tuning in a radio from one radio channel to another. The energy exists on a range of frequencies, doesn't it?
Yes.
You've got infrared, ultraviolet, you've got microwaves. The universe is made up of energy running up different frequencies. So what the medium will do is change the frequency of his investigation to see what he can find.
Ashley?
I find it fascinating because it's so you're the medium and yourself are also working on a remote kind of aspect as well here, because you're saying you're tuning into this person or this individual that has a possible issue. So you're tuning into that, and I'm guessing that it doesn't matter what time. So the person that you're tuning into doesn't need to necessarily know that you're doing that at that point in time.
Precisely, yeah. If you can picture the setup, right? I'm here in one location in the southeast of England, okay, in Kent. My medium is in Wiltshire. Right. Yep. So we are communicating on Skype in exactly the same way that we are now. Okay. Brilliant. And so if you put yourself in that position of the medium, and I say to you, okay, Ashley, what I want you to do is to connect with this person named John, and he is in Michigan in the United States. He's 37 years old, and I want you to allow yourself to connect with his etheric body, with his spiritual energy. And the guides will help you to do that, to find the right frequency, because we all operate on a unique frequency. It's like having a unique fingerprint in the physical world. We have a unique energetic
signature. That's exactly the words I use, your unique energy signature.
Yes. And if something else is attached to that or interfering with that, it shows up.
Yes, because you get a variance on that signature. So I get it.
Okay, at this point, we do actually
this all the time.
Sorry, at this point we do actually have a couple of questions I want to bring in because they're quite relevant to this point. So, first of all, first question is: do you think that people are too quick to think those who feel, see, hear spirits are imagining it?
Yeah, too quick to think that you're imagining it. Using the pragmatism of William James, going back to the 19th century. William James, the Harvard professor of psychology and philosopher, declared that you should never dismiss any idea or any possibility until it's been thoroughly tested. So you can't assume anything. Mm-hmm. You can't assume it's a hallucination, or you can't assume you're imagining something. You also can't assume that there's possession taking place. You can't assume anything. You have to go in with a completely open mind and ask questions and say, what do we have here, really?
Okay, so that was the first question. The second question that came through was, do you find there are spirits who will play with investigators or researchers and are not forthcoming, and it's a drawn-out process getting information, so they're not prepared to work with the medium or Do you find that? Have you found that in some of your cases?
Oh yes, and these are some of the cases that are most fun. I'll tell you what makes me laugh. You get cases of serious researchers, and there are many within the Society for Psychical Research that use technological equipment to try and capture spirit voices. It's called electronic voice phenomena, and Ashley, I'm sure you're familiar with this.
Yep, definitely.
And you know, I've spoken with people who take this seriously, and I've been to their experiments and participated. And I've had a few cases of people who've been experimenting with these technological devices to communicate with spirit, and they've come seriously unstuck. Because they've opened themselves up. They've got, it's called a ghost box, and they invite spirits to talk to them, and it's a technological form of Ouija board. And if they don't know how to protect themselves, and they don't know how what protocols to use for safety, they will get into serious difficulty. It happens all the time. And these are the most interesting cases, because you can have some amazing dialogues with these entities come through, because they all tell lies. You know, they're trying to deceive you. But occasionally, and only occasionally, you'll get one that is willing to share valuable information about themselves and their nature and what they're doing. And those are really, really interesting. And because I record everything, right? If I get one that's particularly interesting, then with the permission of the client, I'll publish it on YouTube for public sharing.
Mm-hmm. Do you, when you get those kind of cases, do you research afterwards to see if what was said was really relevant?
Yeah, the only real way you can research afterwards is see what's already been written by the demonologists and the scholars. Let's take, for example, you get a case of a succubus or an incubus, and you enter into a dialogue with this entity to find out as much as you can about it. And there's a hierarchy. We had one quite recently that declared that it was a succubus of the Lilith hierarchy. Well, I'd never heard of that, so we looked it up, and sure enough, it's been documented by demonologists going back hundreds of years, and it was a fascinating read. And there's a lot of stuff on Wikipedia about these entities from ancient mythology. A recurring theme that often crops up when I ask the medium to investigate a client, and he reports to me that he can see symbolic representations of Egyptian hieroglyphs, and he'll describe the entity in these terms, and he'll say this entity is presenting itself to me with in human form, but with a bird's head. Mm-hmm. And you look up these entities on the Egyptian sites. And they'll give their names, and these entities were worshipped as gods, and they still exist, and they still interact with people. So how amazing is that?
That's pretty cool.
It's fascinating. How do you know that you're dealing with an entity and not a level of the subconscious that somebody has already knew or read about previously in their life?
So that's a good question. There is such a thing as pseudo-possession, where a person can actually create their own possessing entity. And a well-documented test case for this was the case of Achille, which was a pseudonym given to a patient of Pierre Janet of the Paris mental hospital in the 19th century. Achille was a man who lived in Marseille and went on a business trip to Paris. He was a married man, and when he came back, he began to show signs of demonic possession. So he was taken into hospital and admitted as a mental patient, and the psychiatrist called in, Pierre called in the exorcist and said, we've got a man here who's possessed, got a devil with him. And the exorcist said, I'm sorry, Monsieur Janet, but this is not a case for me, it's a case for you. He's not possessed, he's mentally ill. So Pierre Janet used access to the subconscious. He hypnotized him and got to the bottom of it. And it turned out that this man had created the devil to persecute him because he'd been unfaithful to his wife with a woman of the street in Paris. So he created his own demon as a form of self-punishment. And this happens a lot. So in the protocol that I use to investigate the cause of a problem, I'll investigate to see if there are any non-human entities, any alien entities, any earthbounds, and any self-created thought forms, and also dissociated subpersonalities. They're on the checklist.
Okay. So actually, Richard in the chat room has actually asked, how do you differentiate a client who comes to you with a genuine mental illness rather than an attachment?
We get a lot of help from spirit guides and also from the higher self of the person themselves. So if you, to get an idea of who and what the higher self is, if you consider a fundamental principle that we are a spirit that occupies a physical body, okay? And when we die, the spirit leaves. So there is an aspect of ourselves, an aspect of our spiritual selves that is still beyond the physical. You can imagine it, if you like, above us, okay? Yeah. So the spirit occupies the physical form, but there is another aspect of the spirit that is outside the body and above. And that higher self knows everything there is to know about us, about all our past lives and about everything that we're experiencing. So we ask the higher self. And we also have spirit guides that help. So if we're presented with a mystery, we need a solution to a mystery, we just ask the higher self and the guides. And we get the answer from them.
Excellent. Ashley?
No, I was taking it all in. So I'm just kind of working it all out. So we've got our self, we've got a higher self, and all that kind of stuff, and also spirit guides and that kind of link into all this to help you differentiate whether it's a mental illness, whether it's an attachment, and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Right, brilliant. Okay. So you're using a lot of very different tools that could be clarified both as science, psychology, and spirituality sort of side of things as well, really, aren't you?
Well, yes. I mean, we need to be sure what we're dealing with. We get quite a lot of cases referred to us by members of the family. Mm-hmm. We get a parent or a father, mother of a person, a young person who's been admitted to psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with psychosis and schizophrenia and so on. And the parent will contact us and say, we need to know what is going on here because suddenly our son was a lovely, wonderful, caring person, and suddenly he became this horrible, violent person that is, not like our son at all. Is this just mental illness or is there something else going on? So we'll ask all these questions and investigate. And quite often, usually with older people, people in their 50s and 60s, the deterioration of the cognitive functioning has been progressive over many years. So they have developed a serious mental illness where they've lost contact with reality. So it's difficult to determine how far down the road a person has gone. The earlier you can catch them, the better the prognosis is. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not qualified to diagnose mental illness at all. Right? No. That is beyond my remit. I can only convey what I discover through the spirit realms. And I can say to a spirit guide, right, okay, what have we got here? We've got dark force, we've got control devices that have been inserted by alien experimenters. Get rid of those. We've got occult symbolism from a past life. We've got a curse, witchcraft that's been put on someone. So we clear away all the spiritual interferences. We check to see if there are any earthbounds, and we release those to the light. So we do a complete clearance job on the spiritual dimensions. And what is left is the psychology, okay?
Yeah.
And then we ask questions about the psychology. Are there any self-created thought forms? Are there any dissociated subpersonalities? Because when a person goes through some kind of trauma, usually in childhood, or it can be a natural disaster or in battle, where a person comes under extreme distress, they can dissociate. And a dissociated subpersonality can be created. This used to be called multiple personality, and it's now called dissociative identity disorder. So we find out what those dissociated subpersonalities are, and we renegotiate their reintegration into the core self so the person becomes complete again, okay? Yep. And that can usually be effected without too much difficulty. It takes a bit of time sometimes, but it can usually be effected. But when you get an older person, perhaps in their 40s, 50s, 60s, where they are institutionalized, then it's a bit too late to do anything, sadly, and that is sad.
Mm-hmm. On those, I mean, I don't know if are you saying it's a bit too late to do things? I mean, have you had many cases where you've dealt with that more elderly people, where you've come across some interesting methodologies of communicating with them, where they've not been able to communicate on normal sort of day-to-day terms, like through speech and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, I use a form of telepathic hypnosis where you can communicate with the subconscious aspects of the self through telepathy. But going back to what I was saying a moment ago, I've had one or two cases where the person has been communicating with me in such a way that I don't need anyone else to tell me that this person is completely off their rocker. You know, they can be using totally absurd language and delusional thoughts, and it doesn't take a psychiatrist to know that they're talking complete nonsense. And although we can perhaps clear away any negative entities that may be attached to them and interfering with them, once we've done that and they continue talking nonsense, then, you know, there's not much we can do.
It's a shame.
It is a shame, very much so. Okay, so I want to, that's the work you've worked on so far. You want to take this a step further because you want to take it into the care industry, basically, don't you? Like hospitals and care homes and stuff like that, because the attachments come from people that have passed or entities that have passed. And you were talking to me earlier about nurses.
Yes.
Getting attachments, and it's being put down as the wrong diagnosis.
Well, that's right. When we're working with normal day-to-day clients, very often the earthbound attachments that they have with them very often are picked up in hospitals. They've gone into a hospital to visit a relative or friend, and they've walked out with, or they may have been in hospital for something themselves, but they've picked up the spirit of a person who's died in that hospital. And I was teaching a training course, a group of students a couple of months ago. 10 people come along to learn the techniques that I'm using. And I said, okay, we're going to do an exercise now and see if we can pick up any earthbound spirits from the local hospital. And 3 of the students, who were very, very adept at mediumistic abilities, I asked them to tune into the hospital, and they picked up, and it's recorded, I've put it on YouTube, it's there for anyone to see, these earthbounds that were picked up in hospital wards. Now, I went to the SPR lecture last month, and Ashley was there. We sat next to each other and we met this researcher from Argentina. And he was talking about, he delivered his lecture, his paper, on the hypothesis that nurses who experience anomalous phenomena are suffering from workload stress or hallucinations. What was the other term he used? Psychological absorption. They're prone to psychological absorption. Now, as Ashley said earlier, this was a very, very wide and in-depth study, but it works on the hypothesis that these nurses were having hallucinations and prone to absorption and workload stress. Now, I challenge that because I know from my own experience that these spirits are real. They do exist. They have ontological status, okay, which is something that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge, right? But going back to William James's pragmatism, you can't reject something just because you don't believe it yourself. You can't reject something unless it's thoroughly tested. So I said to this researcher, established communication with him, I'm still talking to him by email, and said, right, we need to conduct a different study now. We need to be able to engage these spirits that these nurses see and hear, engage them in dialogue so the nurses know how to deal with them, rather than being labelled as tired from workload stress or liable to hallucinations. They need to learn how to deal with them. And all I need is for one hospital to take that hypothesis seriously. Just one, and we can test it. To me, that's simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a brilliant idea, to be honest with you, because I'd being someone who's in the same lecture, and yes, they did. It did seem to come across about workload stresses and hallucinations and stuff like that. I think there needs to be more research into the possibility of there being other reasons behind it. I mean, like I said earlier before we came on, I know people that work in these environments, in care homes and stuff like that, and they've reported exactly the same things that were reported in those lectures. Yet these people that have reported it to me, that are friends of them, that they're not stressed within their work environment, and they haven't expressed they've been stressed either at that point in time. They did agree with the fact that they haven't been taught how to deal with the loss of patients and stuff like that, as Alejandro, I hope he gets his name right, expressed as well. However, yes, that, like you said, they haven't explored past that point to the possibility that there are spirits, and that interaction with those spirits and finding out the other side of the coin, so to speak, and what that could be doing. It could be. So I totally agree. I think it'd be an excellent point to take it now.
Well, I think we need to consider the implications of this. Let us hypothesize just for a moment that the theory is proven. Let's suggest that a study is undertaken and the evidence shows that these spirits are real and that they can be helped move on. And consider the implications and the repercussions of that knowledge, okay? On the one hand, you've got nurses who fear that they're being ridiculed because of what they say, so therefore they're frightened to speak out, right?
Yep.
If they were allowed to express what they've seen realistically and helped, it will help the nurses that have these experiences in understanding how to deal with them. It'll help the earthbound spirit move on, because otherwise it's trapped, right? And it'll help all of the hospital staff to acknowledge the reality of what happens to a person when they die, which has further benefits to the bereaved. Now, I understand that every hospital has a chaplain, a chaplaincy department. Every hospital has a chapel where people can go to pray for their loved ones and to seek solace and support when a relative or friend dies. Okay.
Yep.
So let me pose this question: how many hospital chaplains are aware of this knowledge that we're talking about here today?
It's interesting.
It's an interesting question, very much so.
And you can begin to understand the repercussions if it were proven to be true. They'd all have to be retrained, wouldn't they?
Yes.
They certainly would. Do you find that people that go into that form of industry tend to be more empathic or have abilities, like psychic abilities and things like that? Do you find that do you feel that's more of a trend? That's why they get pulled into that kind of profession?
It's an interesting question. People get drawn into professions for all sorts of reasons. Now, I do what I do, not because I had any aspirations as a young man to be a scientist or a healer or a therapy. When I left school with no qualifications, I went in the army, and I served for 7 years as a soldier. When I came out of the army, I was a bus driver, and then a truck driver, and then a transport manager. So, and I worked my way up through the profession in the distribution industry. I didn't go to university until I was 50 years old to learn psychology. So now, why did that happen? It's because I had mystical experiences that made me think I was going crazy, and people around me, friends and family, were convinced I was going crazy because I was talking nonsense. But it wasn't nonsense, you see, and I had to go to university to prove that I wasn't crazy, to get a degree in psychology, to study scientific method, to show that these things are a reality. So the people I work with have gone through a similar path, if you like, where they've discovered these mystical experiences, these spiritual phenomena, perhaps late in life, and then pose the question, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I just received a copy of a book, I'll mention this now, just received a book in the post yesterday, written by a gentleman called Brian Sadler. It's his second book, and it's called, the title is So, What is Life All About? Your Questions Answered. And he tells a similar story about how in his mature year he was an engineer, and he began to have experiences that he needed to understand. So then he spent the rest of his life investigating them. And on the back cover it says here, Brian Sadler answers many of the what, how, when and why questions that many have pondered on. This is essential reading not just for the curious seeker, but for open-minded deep thinkers as a comprehensive reference on many metaphysical matters. And this happens to a lot of people. Now, the mediums that I work with, take Andrew, the medium that I work with. He's an IT engineer, got a wife and family and a mortgage, an ordinary guy going about his business with a full-time job. But he had experiences about 10 years ago. He was being thrown out of bed by a poltergeist. And it scared the living daylights out of him. So he had to go out of his way to learn how to deal with it. And now he teaches others how to deal with it. So people come through to this line of work through various avenues that are challenging the mainstream consensus, if you like, to break through the misguided beliefs and get to the real truth that lies beneath.
I totally agree with that, yeah.
I totally agree with that too. Another question that's come up into the chat room. Would somebody's attachment be directly linked to their general belief systems? So do you find that Christians are more affected by demons or devils? Somebody who believes in extraterrestrials will have an alien attachment, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's a good question. What we perceive is influenced by our beliefs. So yes, a person who's a Christian, who's been taught to believe in devils, may see a negative entity as in a demonic form. In fact, Andrew, the medium that I work with, when he sees a negative spirit entity, he describes them as like a gargoyle that's grinning at him. He categorises them on 3 levels: the small, the medium, and the large. The small gargoyle that's mischievous, the medium one that glares and snarls at you to try to frighten you, and then the large ones that are really, really dangerous. And Muslims will see jinn, and different cultures would describe them according to their culture. And if you go back through history, to different cultures throughout history, the way their religious and spiritual beliefs are presented and the language they use is dependent on their culture and the nature of the language at that particular period in history. So, for example, a shaman from the Caribbean could be looking at the same thing as a shaman from Asia, and they would describe it differently, but they're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
When we take our major religions and we talk about God, the power of creation, the Muslim, the Christian, the Jew, the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Taoist would all look at the same thing but give it a different name.
Yes.
And describe it differently, but it's still the same thing. And it's the same with devils and demons. We use the language that our culture has taught us to use.
I agree with that. When we talk about spirit guides, they appear to you in a form that you will recognise and be comfortable with,
Yes.
to give you that information rather than necessarily appearing in their true form.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's difficult to know what their true form is because they will present themselves to you in a manner that's acceptable to you. People who have shamanic beliefs believe in power animals, and their guide will often be presented as a power animal. I had one the other day that was presented as a power animal. And of course, the manipulative demons and devils, if you like, of dark forces, they can present themselves to you in accordance with your beliefs and in their deception. For example, a dark force entity, a demonic entity, can present itself to you in your mind's eye, in your hallucination, in your vision, as a guardian of the light, as an angel. And this is where the principle of telepathic hypnosis has such importance, because we are suggestible creatures. I can deliver a suggestion to you, and if you are in that receptive state of mind, an altered state of consciousness, whatever I tell you is reality. And that's how hypnosis works. And that's how spirit intervention actually works. Telepathic hypnosis, telepathic suggestion is the central pillar of spirit influence.
Can you just explain the term for people that may not understand telepathic hypnosis? Because earlier on, you were before the show, you were talking about a study that was actually done.
Well, this is a study that's going on. The previous study, yes. Telepathic hypnosis actually has a very long history, and I'll be delivering a lecture on this at the SPR on the 7th of June for anyone who wants to come along. It's got a long history. It goes back to mesmerism, goes back to the 18th century, when the Marquis de Puysegur, a French aristocrat, was using mesmeric technique for his patients, his clients. And he reported that some people were turning up for an appointment already in the hypnotic trance. And he wondered how this was happening. And it was the first time it was recorded. And since then, much research has been done. Frederick Myers of the SPR conducted research with Pierre Janet, the French psychiatrist I mentioned earlier. And they worked with a woman in Le Havre called Leonie, where they experimented with her, sending suggestions to her over a distance of half a mile, where she would go into a trance, and that's well documented. And then later in the early 20th century, in the 1920s and 30s, a Russian neurologist at the University of Leningrad was inspired by these reports from Myers and Janet and wanted to test the hypothesis himself. And he tested it with over distances from Leningrad to Vladivostok, where he was able to induce a hypnotic trance into a patient over that distance, a subject over that distance. And this led to a great deal of interested research internationally. He worked with colleagues in America, in New York, in London, the SPR in London, and the Athens Society of Psychic Research. And they conducted experiments with people over great distances, for example, from New York to Athens, from Athens to Sydney, Australia, from London to Moscow, all over the place. And a whole series of conferences were held on that subject, telepathic hypnosis, for several decades, well into the 1950s. And what they were trying to do, the fact was irrefutable. The empirical evidence that it worked was irrefutable. So they needed to understand how it worked. They needed to understand how a thought, a suggestion, can travel such a great distance from A to B and have an impact on a subject. And the theory they worked on was that the thought was carried by an electromagnetic wave. Now, the electromagnetic activity in the brain can be measured. Alpha, theta, beta, delta waves can be measured. And that's what led them to believe that the thought was being transmitted by the electromagnetic wave. And they talked about at these conferences about capturing a thought in transit. And they were very, very excited about this. But they could never prove it. In fact, what they did effectively prove was that time and space are irrelevant. That it doesn't matter how far away the subject is, the curvature of the Earth, and they put people in Faraday cages and surrounded them with lead and iron walls, nothing would stop the suggestion getting through. So they proved it wasn't physical. They proved that the thought, the idea, the suggestion is beyond time and space. And that is spirit. Spirit is beyond time and space. And these experiments were dropped, but they led later, they provided the foundation for the experiments conducted by Stanford Institute of Technology in North America, financed by the American Department of Defense, where they developed this business that we now know as remote viewing. It was used for spying. Now, this idea came from Vasilyev's experiments because the Russians were using it to spy on America during the Cold War. And when the CIA got to hear about it, they commissioned Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff, and they put together a team and they developed the remote viewing project. So and this is precisely the way we work, the way I work with my medium. I'll say to the medium, okay, access this person at a distance and tell me what you find. It's all the same principle. Has a long history, is scientifically validated. It just will not fit into the physical box.
Ashley?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. The long history that led into what was known as the Stargate Experiment, Russell Targ and all those kind of guys.
Yes.
That is the same sort of stuff that fascinates me, to be honest with you, the whole telepathy aspect of it, and the remote viewing part of it as well, and the fact that a thought isn't contained by time and space is it just blows my mind every time. It's like, and knowing that, but you said something in the midst of that, the fact that it's not contained by time and space, and that spirit, that's the bit that kind of balances the two off, isn't it? The science and the spirituality sort of side of things in one hit, really.
Yeah, what intrigues me is where modern psychological research, modern parapsychology research, and most members of the SPR are engaged in this kind of research where they're trying to discover the mechanics of psi phenomena, PSI. And I have people now, I have students ask me, say, Dr. Palmer, what can you tell me what psi is? Well, psi is the 23rd letter of the Greek alphabet. It's a pitchfork sign. It's a shorthand symbol for psychic phenomena. Okay? So when scientists and parapsychologists are trying to find an answer to what psi is, I think that's a cul-de-sac. That's a misnomer. To me, that's an absurdity. Instead of trying to find out what psi is, let's call it by its proper name. And these are spiritual phenomena, right? Clairvoyance, spiritual communication, apparitions, hearing voices from the dead, mediumistic, spiritualist, clairvoyant communication. Is telepathy with spirits. To my way of thinking, the theoretical construct that has been made up to call it psi is a misnomer. Let's investigate the reality of this. Let's investigate spiritual phenomena and not try to find an explanation for psi.
So playing devil's advocate, just jumping in a bit.
Please do.
The psi aspect of it, I suppose. I do like the telepathy aspect. I mean, it's to be fair, it helps explain a lot because I'm not. I always put my hands up and Kerry will back me up on this. I'm not from the spiritual side of things, and I like to think that the communication that occurs could be seen as telepathic communication between us all, and that information is transferred willingly or unwillingly between ourselves in a greater collective consciousness sort of thing. So effectively, rather than it being spiritual communication, it's like an unknown Google, if you like, into the ether to allow us to pull down this information that allows us to think this spiritual communication going on. For someone like me who's having that kind of aspect of it, how would you counter that argument then? Sorry,
you see, I wouldn't argue against that at all. I will acknowledge that people do communicate with each other telepathically. And going back to my research for my PhD, when I was researching the work of Frederick Myers, one of the founder members of the SPR, he declared that people who are mediumistic are at the forefront, the cutting edge, the vanguard, if you like, of the evolution of consciousness. So people who have the ability to communicate by telepathy are vanguards in our evolution. And we all have this ability in varying degrees. I personally find it difficult, but I do have experiences from time to time that make me think, hang on a minute, where did that come from? You can be thinking about a person that you haven't seen for a long, long time, and then suddenly you get a phone call from them. There's and Rupert Sheldrake talks about it, his morphic fields. So there's a lot of scientific evidence to support the reality of telepathy. In addition to that, if people can communicate with each other telepathically, either willingly or unconsciously, deliberately or accidentally. In fact, I've got a client at the moment who feels that his thoughts are being transmitted to other people accidentally, and it worries him because he thinks other people are picking up on his thoughts. So if people can communicate in this way, that's fine. But in addition to that, if spirits do exist, then surely they would be able to do the same.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Very true. So have you ever had some form of attachment from yourself from the work you've done?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. And so I've had to learn how to protect myself. I was, many years ago, in the early days when I was first learning about these things, I had a client come to me. She came to visit me, actually, in my home. And as she, on the day that she was due to arrive, when she rang my doorbell, I was still in bed. I was bedbound, and I had to drag myself out of bed, drag myself down the stairs, and when I opened the door, I was bent double. I had to reach up to the doorknob because my body had been contorted into that shape, and I'd been completely physically incapacitated by the entity that I was trying to remove from her.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So how did you learn to protect yourself? How did you learn to close your etheric aura to attachments and suggestion from telepathy?
Well, to answer that question, I've put a protocol, a recording on my website, and it's on YouTube as well, and anyone can listen to it and use it. And so all the clients that come to me with a problem, I will work with them and release and clear any negative interference that they have. And when I send the report to them, I will send a link to that page on the website and say, follow the instructions here to keep yourself safe. And it's a daily routine that needs to be used in pretty much the same way you have to protect yourself physically from the physical environment. When you get up in the morning, you go to the bathroom, you do your ablutions, you get dressed, and before you step out into the world, you're protected from the environment, aren't you? You put your clothes on and you're protected. And we know that we have an immune system that has evolved to protect us from disease, infection. Okay? Mm-hmm. We need to also bear in mind that we have an etheric body that needs protection. And the protection for that is the aura. And if your aura is robust and sound and healthy, then you have protection from spiritual infection. If the aura becomes perforated, if it gets holes in it, then you're liable to infection. And what can cause perforations in the aura? Drug and alcohol abuse, trauma, intense emotional energy, anger, resentment. People who go through life with a constant resentment and anger towards other people in the world will attract the like energy. Like attracts like. So if you've got a buoyant disposition and you see the good in life, then you're pretty safe, really.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We're actually coming to the end of the show. There is one last question I want to ask you that's come up in the chat room quickly. Does Dr. Palmer think that a medium should be more inquiringly open-minded as to where their skill comes from, as opposed to just believing they're contacting dead relatives?
Oh, yeah, you should always ask questions. Should always ask questions. Going back to the research I did with Frederick Myers, he was a scientist and he needed evidence of the existence of the spirit after the death of the body, and he had scientific criteria that he used in order to validate the identity of spirits coming through. And I used this as well. I put it to the test the other day. I wanted to conduct an experiment to test the identity of a spirit that was coming through and talking to us. You have to ask questions. You can't just take it on trust. You have to ask questions. Mm-hmm. You need to get evidence that can be validated from an external source. If you're speaking to a deceased relative, there are things you will know about that relative. The day they died, how old they were when they died, where they were, what they died of, the sort of things they'd like to do in life, what were they wearing, all these personal details you can ask. And if you don't get a name and if you don't get the information you're asking for, then you can dismiss it.
Great. Thank you so much for being so candid. If anybody out there knows of any form of hospital that is prepared to work with Dr. Palmer on his research studies, please get in touch. Terry, where can people... What's your YouTube channel, please?
Just put in the search engine Dr. Terence Palmer and my YouTube channel comes up. My website is terencepalmer.co.uk, and that's called Healing the Wounded Spirit. And there's a contact form on there. If anyone wants to contact me, do it through the website. Or you can send me an email. That's palmert55@gmail.com. But please bear in mind, I'm not in a position to take on any more individual clients for therapeutic work because, we've got quite a list and I need more mediums to work with because Andrew is not in a position to be able to handle the workload that we've got at the moment. So I'm just really interested in hearing from hospital staff or administrators who think they can help with this research.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Ashley, last words?
Honestly, I'd look forward to seeing you at the SPR for your lecture in June, I think it is, isn't it? June the 7th?
June the 7th, yeah. I look forward to seeing you too, Ashley.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me in the studio tonight. Tonight's discussion has been absolutely fascinating. Really, really do appreciate that. Tomorrow evening on Parasearch Radio, we've got the Parasearch UK Radio Encore show even. We spoke to the lovely KD Stafford and we looked at God's Helmet. And if you don't know what that is, then please tune in and have a listen to that particular discussion. I will be going live on the Parasearch Radio group page tomorrow to give you a full rundown of all the shows up and coming for the week. And on that note, I bid you all a very farewell. Thank you for joining us and listening.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.